Welcome to the Traits Podcast. We're focusing on building higher performing organizations. And I have a bit of a treat for you. The next two episodes are really two parts of one interview. We recorded two interviews, but Jason Woodard is amazing. It was so much fun to interview. He's a really humble guy that has a crazy amount of education, business experience, works for a really cool company. And I just want to set you up for both interviews here. So the first interview, there's going to be a long intro into Jason's industry where the tech doesn't change very much, but change is happening all the time with people. And that's the point that I want you to focus in on. He's got a PhD, but is more of an entrepreneur than a typical engineer. Metromont as a business is building NFL stadiums. They're doing something that's probably not considered very sexy by most individuals in building these NFL stadiums, and yet they're in the NFL. They're doing something with an industry that is considered very, very sexy, very intriguing for most North Americans. Before we get into this, I need to explain something because Jason is going to be talking about implementers and initiators a lot. I've explained this in the past, but I'm going to give you a really quick explanation here so that you can have a better understanding if you're not used to or understand a lot about the traits profiling system, how this works. So an implementer is somebody who takes ideas and makes them better. I'm going to repeat that. An implementer is somebody who takes ideas and makes them better. They tend to be very detailed, and they can just jump into the weeds and make something spectacular out of an idea. Whereas an initiator is somebody who typically has the big ideas. They're instead of focusing on the trees, they're typically focusing on the forest. They're very, very motivated individuals when it comes to drive, goals, getting things done. Typically, these are the leaders of an organization. So when Jason talks about implementers and initiators, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about what is sometimes considered more of an entry-level position in a business versus a position that is one of leadership, especially top leadership in an organization. Something that I really loved about this interview, both interviews, was that Jason gave really great detailed answers that dug deep down into how he thinks, what he's learned over the years. Thank you so much for this, Jason, if you're listening to this afterwards. What I appreciated about that was that you've got somebody who's been in industry for a long time, but also the business has been in an industry for a long time. So they've learned from mistakes over generations, which has been a lot of fun. One quick last thing before we get to the first interview, and that is my audio is washed out. Actually, for both of these interviews, I fixed the problem. It was impossible to edit out. I apologize. Do not let this affect how great the information from Jason was. He talks much more than I do, which was a blessing here. Enjoy both interviews. In the outro, I'll give you some takeaways from both interviews. Enjoy the show. Good morning, afternoon, evening. I don't know where this podcast episode finds you, but we are in the middle of the day. Jason Woodard is with me here today, and we are going to be delving into his organization and some really unique things that have come up as he has helped his organization grow. But maybe before I go too deep into this, because I know I want to ask you questions right off the top, Jason, feel free just to tell everyone about what is Metromont. You work for Metromont. What is Metromont? What does it do? What is the industry? Explain a little bit more. Brag about your company a bit.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me. It is an honor to be asked to do this. And it's an honor to be asked to do this on behalf of our company. At the beginning of 2025, Metromont is a large precast, pre-stressed concrete supplier. So we are not what you would consider to be a glamorous business, but we put up structures and buildings that everyone sees. We're doing our ninth or 10th NFL stadium right now. We actually have two under construction, one in Buffalo, one in Tennessee. And we've been around for a while, so there's a lot of things that we've done. We've grown from 300 people to 1,500 people. We've survived depressions and recessions and different sways in political power throughout the world, survived at least one world war. So we've been around a while. We've been resilient, and we're very, very proud of the fact that our company is turning 100 in 2025. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact date of birth, but so we're going to just go ahead and celebrate the whole year.
That works. That always works for it. And I think it's fascinating. Everyone has a different conception of big. What is big, right? But people who are throwing up NFL stadiums are typically a decent sized company in what they're doing and providing services to. So that's really cool.
We're just part of the team. We there's a product line that we supply that happens to be, what everyone sits on. It's not the seat itself, but it's what the seats are attached to. Nobody pays any attention to that after the fact, of course. But we're just part of a team. It takes a huge team to bring projects like that together, and we're on. Like I said earlier, we're honored to be a part of those things.
There's a new NHL arena going up in my hometown in Western Canada, and as I was thinking about you, getting to know you a little bit, it gives a completely different conception. As I'm running another project myself, I'm putting up a little bit of concrete up in my own building that I've got in another city, and just thinking through all the processes of everything that needs to take place. Such an important part of every building, but like you said, it's not something that anyone thinks about at any time unless they're involved in the process, right?
Right. That's right. It is. I tell everyone, we do a lot of great things in environments that are challenging and through processes that are challenging, which, we'll get into much more deeply later, which requires a lot of good people.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe I'm going to give you a chance to talk about yourself a little bit and your roles in the company. But before I go there, I wanted to ask, with prefab concrete, what changes have you seen in the industry since you started about 20 years ago with Metromont?
Oh, wow. That's a great question because we're not an IT company, so change doesn't occur very rapidly. It occurs very, very slowly. Uh, we're starting to see some benefits of automation and mechanization, I would say is a better word to use, because of the size and scale and weight of the pieces that we make. It's not easy to automate things. And when you're in the business that we're in, our business is more analogous to fancy custom cabinetry business than it is to a widget manufacturer or even an automobile manufacturer. So things change all the time. We have to manage change. That is the one constant within our business. I think, a lot of the things, the evolution within Metromont, we'll get into this much more deeply later too, has been in the way that we've gone about utilizing the strengths of the people that we have. And, our customers have gotten a lot more sophisticated over the years. There's a lot more accountability on their part for what we need to do. And there's a lot more ability on their part to track what we're doing to be able to supply their projects. But as far as, revolutionary technology and things like that, there have been a couple of milestones. The big one being, the bringing about of what we call self-consolidating or self-compacting concrete. That's changed our business quite a bit. And we're beginning to use some automated, what we call layout tools within our business. I joke with people that we have a DeskJet printer that's attached to an automated mop bucket that rolls around and marks our beds for us. But it really is a very sophisticated piece of equipment that we're beginning to use and adapt to be able to, as the workforce shrinks and the availability of labor shrinks, it's not all about replacing jobs. It's about being able to have the people that you have work in areas that provide the most impact. And if you can shift your labor around by automating certain processes, that's an efficiency gain for an employer, even though you've not reduced your headcount.
That's a really good perspective there, Jason, simply because so much, everything is called AI now. And actually, there is no such thing as AI that exists right now. It's just, again, algorithms in a big box. But the way we think about AI is a lot of fear of, hey, everyone's going to lose their jobs. And then that's a good perspective to just look at it and say, hey, we don't have to lower our headcount. We can simply make everyone more efficient and get a lot done and keep fantastic people.
Yeah, and the reality is no one has a full complement of their workforce right now. Nobody. And technology allows us to be able to still do what we do in an efficient and effective manner to meet our customers' demands with the headcount that we have. So I'm with you. I don't see AI as being a threat. I see it as being a tool that helps us become better and more effective with the people we have in the future.
I think about other technologies, and this isn't like an AI discussion, but I think about other technologies that have come down the pike, like the internet or whatever, that has completely changed how all business is done, and yet it hasn't stopped people from working. It creates new jobs and new products in so many ways. So yeah, I'm always smile to myself when people get really scared about whatever AI, that I go, people are pretty clever. We'll figure out other ways to make money and create businesses, right?
That's right. The human race has survived for a long time. It's kind of adapting.
That's true. That's our strength. So okay. So speaking of a little bit of adapting, you've had a few roles at Metromont. Maybe explain those. What has your journey been, and what has been kind of the best fit, and why? What have you enjoyed?
Oh, wow. So, going on my 25th year in this industry, I'll go back before that. I have a PhD in ceramic engineering from Clemson University. I never wanted to be a researcher. I always wanted to be in business and hopefully one day run a business or be part of a leadership team of business. That's the one thing I knew when I went to college, even though I was studying engineering. And I've been in building materials, believe it or not, my entire career. It started with a very highly automated, it's called autoclaved aerated concrete manufacturer in Florida, right out of graduate school, that happened to be owned by the same company that used to own Metromont. And it was a new venture, big investment, international business experience. I probably got 10 years of experience in five because it was a startup, brand new. It was a great experience, but it did not survive. And when the decision was made to close that company, I had some contact with the owners of Metromont, or the majority, significant minority shareholders of Metromont at the time. And through internal channels, arrangements were made, and I came to work for Metromont as a quality control manager for our Charlotte plant. And a year later, I was running a plant in Dalton, Georgia. Year and a half later, I was running two plants, and not long after that, I was running three plants. So I had basically a P&L responsibility for a region. We did some reorganization along in there, and I ended up going to Nashville to turn a plant around that had been in existence for over 10 years. And frankly, we bought the property and bought the plant in order to be able to build the original Tennessee Titans football stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And we needed to find out what we could do up there. And the plan was to see if we could make money or, possibly even shut the doors. Very proud to say that first 6 months we made money. The first year the plant was profitable, and 3 years later, we made a decent profit at a business that had been very difficult. And we did it with mostly the same people that were there when I got there. We had a few pieces to the puzzle that had to be moved. And it was around that time that I became familiar with Dwayne Fliss, or Dwayne from, we called it the OPP at the time, but it's now become the traits profile. And I really became fascinated around that time with helping people. I've been in turnaround operations, and I've become fascinated with helping people grow, organizational development on a broader scale than leading an operation. I had decided that that was something that I would like to do. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to do that internally within Metromont. We were going through some changes at that time. We had been taken back private by the family that started the business originally. And our owner and president at the time saw a need to place more emphasis on our human resources function and develop that function across the company. It was, really a very astute move on his part, because we grew a lot after that. And I was able to pursue my passion, although I will tell you, I love the plant environment. I love being with those guys in the heat of battle every day. But this was a little bit different calling. It allowed me to settle my family down as they were growing, because up until that point in time, I'd moved 5 times in 6 years. with my family, and that's evolved into the role that I have today, which is I'm on the ladder in the latter stages of my career, but it's a role that allows me to serve human resources, serve our leadership as a bounce off guy. There are a few of us here that have had a lot of experience and gone through a lot of the school of hard knocks. As the company has grown, we've made a lot of mistakes that we hope we can help people learn from. And a couple other things I joke with people is that Vice President of Corporate Services is the catch-all for the departments nobody else wants to manage, like safety, continuous improvement, and things like that. So, that's what I do. But my passion is really to find ways to help our organization be successful.
Okay, you said that you had an owner that saw a need to work on HR a little bit. Do you I don't know if you know the answer to this, but do you know what led that person to going, hey, we need to make some changes here?
I think we were working with an outside consultant at the time, and that outside consultant knew us well. He's actually still around and still knows us well. And I think he was an advocate for our owner having a little different voice around him, and an advocate for really beginning to place some emphasis on that HR role. So, the right timing always presents itself. You don't have to ever try to force it. And it was just a confluence of events that led to creation of this role. And I wasn't an HR person. I was an operations person. I didn't know anything about, labor law or any of that stuff, but I knew what it took to build an organization of people. And I will say this: one of the most impactful meetings I had early on in this phase of my career was with Dwayne Fliss. We spent 2 days with him. I got to spend 2 days with him one-on-one, learning about the profile. And he also took the time to take me under his wing and share some very, very direct thought about what it means to be an owner versus what it means to be an employee or an associate, as we call it. And that direction very significantly impacted the way that I approached my work on a day-to-day basis.
Interesting. So I want to ask more about that. What from the conversation about owners versus associates, as you talked about, what was the biggest impact moment or idea from that conversation?
So it was how the perspective of ownership is different from the perspective of an associate. So with an owner, it is their money or their investment. Everyone can go away and the owner is still around and the business still has its identity. And when you are making decisions and trying to help, I worked directly for the owner, the president of the company for most all of my career. And when you're helping that person make decisions, put yourself in their shoes and take their perspective as the owner and just see if what you're saying actually makes any sense or not. And remembering, when you're proposing raises or you're proposing expansions of activities, it really is their money. And so we've got to be good stewards of that and make sure that we get the most for what we're asking for.
It's an aside, but every once in a while I follow sports, and often in the media, I hear people really railing against owners and saying, hey, they're just rich people, they're rich billionaires or whatever. And my perspective as a business owner is, okay, and you know what? There are good and bad people in every industry, every area of life. That's just the way humans are. It's not a wealth thing, it's a people thing. But within that, it changes perspective when you think, hey, wait a second, with this contract of hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever, it's coming out of someone's pocket. There still needs to be a plan for this that makes sense for the long term, right? It's interesting what you said there, because one thing that stands out to me sometimes between owners and employees or associates is the time frame that people think. Now, as you get up to VP, president levels, director levels, you see people who are thinking longer term. And I know where you probably know where I'm going with this, but legitimately, we've talked about implementers versus initiators. People who can implement the crazy ideas that the big wigs come up with and want to take the company in some role, that person at the top or near the top is thinking big ideas with long time frames often. And we need people that can't think long term, that actually really focus well on the short term and how to implement something now rather than thinking about how wonderful it's going to be in a few years. Do you have any comments on that at all?
I could not have said that any better myself. You're exactly right. And that's one of the particular challenges that our business faces because we our business is totally predicated upon being excellent and world class change agents because every building starts out as a concept in someone's mind. So you've got a big picture there, right? And every building makes somebody some money. So at the end of the day, that's a big deal. So you go from conceptual to you hire an architect and an engineer to begin to put lines on paper to define it. So that's a little smaller scope. That's part of the implementation phase. And then we get on board and we have to transform it because we're such a niche industry that very little of the work we do is drawn as a precast concrete job. We have to convert that from a drawing in a system that is not ours to our products and our components, which then gets broken down even further to the individual component, which is then reassembled to make something real at the job site. And we have to repeat, and no two jobs are the same. And we have to repeat that process over and over and over. So our strength is short-term focus and short-term change management. Where we really struggle is in big picture strategy and long-term execution. So even at the executive level, we've gotten to be executives because we're really, really good at managing short-term change. We're having to learn as we get bigger to step out to another level and almost look at the business from the outside in so that we can let the change agents do their jobs and let us help because of our experience, let us help provide some strategic vision for where the company should go in the future.
Yeah, something that I'm pulling out here, Jason, is that you guys are creating tailor fit, custom tailored something, right? And it's not a suit, it's not shoes. You're creating a custom tailored massive product. And you have to repeat that custom tailored approach to every project you come to. It's fascinating to think about the size that you're doing it at. So you've talked about change agents a number of times now. And one of my favorite quotes from the first conversation we had was, "How do I become a good change agent?" Maybe pull that apart a little bit. What do you mean by change agents? What do you mean by how you become a good change agent? Well, yeah, just flesh that out a bit.
So a change agent is someone who leads some sort of transformational process. And transformation means changing something from one state to another. So in our case, we're changing something from lines on a drawing to a great big piece of concrete and many pieces of concrete that are assembled to make a building or to make a football stadium or whatever our customer needs from us. And in order to become that person, first of all, it's very hard to become a change agent. I'm in the camp, from the initiator implementer perspective that initiators are change agents. The level of detail that an initiator has determines their ability to focus on details within the change that has to occur. So there's some initiators that are really good in our industry, in our business, and there's some initiators that are more entrepreneurial in nature that don't get into the details that we need to get into. So I'm a big believer that they're wired that way. And when we've made the mistake of putting implementers in initiator roles or vice versa, which we'll talk more about later, they can that's not a recipe for success within the organization. And with our business, and this is another lesson I learned from Dwayne, is 10 to 15% of our jobs are change management, change agent type jobs. They're initiators, they have to be, which means the remaining proportion, the very large proportion of our workforce, of our associates, are implementers. And there's that natural conflict between the two because they don't see the world the same way. Um, and we have to both need to learn to walk in each other's shoes to be successful and make this whole thing work. One of the reasons I say change agents are made or born, not made, is you just look at how people react to change in general. And I'll use an example within our company. So we were talking about chaos as a leadership team one day. And I looked at my boss, our owner, and I said, I love chaos. More chaos, the better, because I'm a natural change agent. And he looked at me and he said, "You're crazy. I want things to be calm and consistent." I says, "Oh no." I said, "If building's burning down, throw me in the middle of it. I want to be able to get in there and problem solve it." So yeah, that's a story I'll share as to the difference between a change agent or an initiator and an implementer. Um, I can't remember exactly what we said when you and I talked preparing for the podcast, but change agents are you've got to be careful with how you manage them. Self-awareness for a change agent is absolutely paramount in their ability to be successful because most of the people they'll work with will not be like them.
So when you like, I'm thinking about that project in I think it was Tennessee, right, for the Titans, where you were changing things around, and you mentioned that you're a change agent there, a massive change agent, and then you've consistently been that change agent in various roles that you've had in the organization or in different places that you found yourself at different times. I wonder, you're saying so that nature plays a role. We're wired a certain way. What else goes into that? What lessons have you learned along the way that are absolutely essential to maybe taking somebody who has a natural ability for something and then taking it to the next degree? Like I think about, again, we're talking about athletes a little bit here tonight. So let's say you take the Michael Jordan, whoever it is. Obviously, the guy's got a bit of natural skill, right? He's not born with no skill at all. Having said that, the work that he put into basketball in his skill sets made him one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time. So maybe talk about that aspect. Somebody who's wired, loving change, loving chaos, as you talked about. What are the skills that are involved to make sure that that person becomes a great change agent?
The first one is to have them realize who they are. And as I mentioned self-awareness earlier, they've got to be aware of who they are. They've got to be comfortable in their own skin, per se. And the other thing is that they have to be aware of how they are different and really truly value and appreciate the differences between themselves and other people. Initiators and implementers, we've said this a lot, there is a natural conflict between the two because they are wired almost completely opposite. It's like the positive end and the negative end of a magnet. They're different, completely different. And they don't attract one another. In fact, they repel one another, so they're opposite from a magnet. And both parties, but most especially the change agent, because they're usually the ones leading the transformation process, they have to be aware of how the other people are thinking. They have to be aware of how they think and how that conflict arises so that they can manage it. So they have to learn, and this is where behavioral adaptability comes into play. They have to be adaptable enough to modify their behaviors for the situation at hand so that they can accomplish the goal, which is to transform something from one state to the next.
I love the way you just put that, Jason, because so much of our culture says, you can't change me. Like, why is everyone trying to change me? And what you're saying there is, hey, we're not changing you. Let's adapt the behavior for a period of time to make sure that everything runs the way it needs to run and still be who you are. You don't have to change who you are. Does that make sense? Am I getting that right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We look at that behavioral adaptability portion of the profile very closely for anyone that is going to be in a change agent role. We want it to be average or higher. And the ones that are more successful typically within our organization are the ones that score higher in that behavioral adaptability category if they're already a natural change agent to begin with. If we see a change agent that has low adaptability, we know that could be a bit of a challenge for them to accept the differences between the way they would go about doing something and the way someone else, like an engineer or a drafter, who is a classic technical specialist, would go approach their role. And quite often it creates conflict because you're not able to put yourself in those other shoes and try to think on their terms as to what they need to be successful, which is what being a good leader is all about.
Agreed. The picture that comes to mind right now, I've got two people arguing vehemently, and one is saying the sky is green, and the other person saying the sky is blue, and the other one saying the grass is green, and they're arguing about this vehemently. And somebody comes in and says, "Hold on, guys. So you're talking about the sky, yeah, and you're talking about the grass, yeah." You might both be right here. So let's figure out a way to communicate and meet in the middle somewhere so that we're speaking the same language. We're connecting on some level that works to express what you need to express. Is that an analogy that makes sense?
Oh, absolutely. We talk a lot about whenever there's disagreement or conflict, and disagreement is not conflict. Disagreement is just very simply that you don't agree on something, and that's perfectly fine.
Yep.
Conflict gets in the way of getting things done. So we help people understand the difference between the two. But when we get to the conflict stage, the more we help people understand the differences between who they are and someone else, and the more we're able to quantify those differences by showing it to them on a piece of paper, the more they understand that it's not personal, that it's just simply you're looking at the same piece of paper or the same environment from two very different perspectives, and you're both right.
Yeah. So coming back to what you originally said, when I talked about becoming a good change agent, you said, number one, you've got to become self-aware, know who I am. Secondly, understand where other people are at and where they're coming from, what is their perspective. And then thirdly, it sounds like you're saying, hey, we now need to find common ground, or we need to communicate ideas in a way that makes sense to both parties.
That's correct. Very well said.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. So the other statement that, and I've got some other questions for you, but the other statement that really stood out from our conversation the other day or a couple of weeks ago was sometimes you can't directly hire a project manager into a project management role. And one theme that keeps coming up in these conversations with great business leaders is the question of how do you hire somebody who you know is going to be in a different role someday, or how do you hire for the future? Maybe give your thoughts on how that works in your organization and gleanings that you've made.
So would it be okay if I kind of go back and retrace some of our history and how we got to this point?
Please do. That would be great.
I think some of that's important. So when we first became familiar with the traits profile, it became very intriguing to us. And the reason is we had gone through, we were a classic organization. We were linear. You start off in one job, you progress to the next job. So if you're really good at some sort of technical specialist role, we would promote you to be the crew leader or the change agent for that role, for that department. And we would end up firing the change agent because they weren't change agents. Well, we didn't know that. We didn't know how to identify that. And once we understood fundamentally, first, the difference in our business is primarily initiators and implementers in our roles. Once we started identifying which roles required which behaviors for success and high performance, and then we started looking at our people, what we found was the pattern of taking an implementer, a strong technical specialist, and because they're really good at that specialty, we promoted them into a change agent role where they have little skill or little natural ability. And their success was their lack of success in that role was our fault.
Do you have do you have an example that comes to mind with that? You don't have to give names, but do you have a specific example of where somebody's at and what happened in that process?
Oh, sure. And we still talk about this example today. Is we have a position in our company when you make concrete, you have to set the formwork for the concrete. So there's either metal railing or wood forming. There's something that contains the concrete that has to be placed in. That person has to take a drawing and place all of this formwork according to the drawing in order to make the piece of concrete. We call them a form setter. That person, that is a detail oriented, steady Eddie, repeat the process, get it right job. Classic technical specialist implementer role. And then all of a sudden, because they're really good at that, we thought they would make good group leaders, which then takes them out of technical specialty and requires them to manage a group of people to get a task done. Well, that starts getting more towards the change agent role. In fact, it does. It's an initiator role. And we we were going through group leaders. And we, of course, we're like any other company. We thought we knew better, right? We thought our experience and as managers is our job to make that decision. And then we get punched right in the face that our failure is our fault. And it was. It truly was. And that lesson has stuck with us for 20 years.
Interesting. So you were just basically running through these fantastic employees that were put into a position that was unfair to them. And then basically, what were you doing? You were letting them go? Or how was that relationship ending?
We were letting them go.
Oh, that's
They
brutal.
weren't performing. So one of the first tasks that I had when I stepped into the role I'm in now, we completely revamped our pay structure. Our pay and compensation structure required them to be promoted for their pay to increase. So it was that system that was causing us to make some really bad decisions
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't have any other way to reward people. So the reward system for all this ties in as well. And we completely changed ours to say, some people advance through promotion. Some people advance through becoming better technical specialists, and we've got to make sure that our pay ranges are wide enough to accommodate that as people grow in their careers.
Okay, we haven't talked about this. Please fill me in more about how you have these pay ranges, because I've got some ideas from this. I really want to hear more about this. I think that this would revolutionize the way business is being done by and large.
So I'll just use the form setter and crew leader role. So if we had someone that had been with us, say, 2, 3, 4 years that had shown an aptitude to be a good form setter and they've become really good at it, they would max out or they would hit the top of the pay range for that job. So every job had a pay range. And in the old system, the only way for them to make more money was to take on more responsibility, which, if you think about it in retrospect, it was really, we were devaluing their technical ability. So the only way for them to move ahead, and everyone wants to make a little more for their families. That's why we work, is to provide. So the only way for them to provide better was to take on these roles which they weren't good fits. Now, they didn't know this. We didn't know it. So when we started looking at that and we looked at the pattern that was there, we said, "Oh my goodness, we are taking one of the most valuable roles in our company, because that form setter role is extremely important to us, and we're losing talent because our pay structure is working against our retention of that talent." So whatever role you have, if it's an initiator type role or an implementer type role, you've got to have a compensation structure which rewards what that person needs to be good at for the length of their career. Now, part of the challenge of that is that technical specialist roles, what you really want to do is invest in their technical specialty and help them become better at that over time and reward them for that. And unfortunately, in a hierarchical organization, it means that they may not get promoted to certain levels, because as you go higher in an organization, in some roles, it's necessary to become more of a change agent because that's your job. But you got to provide enough width in their pay range to let them, if they want to, spend an entire career in that role. If because you're benefiting from it as a company, and the people around them are benefiting from their experience and their knowledge of being a technical specialist. And so that once we learned that lesson, we looked at all our roles and we identified all of our roles as either, as they were either an implementer or an initiator role. And we said, okay, we need to make sure that form setter can work for 15 to 20 years and never be capped out on his pay. And if we have someone that's a form setter who really is a change agent and is going through that process for training purposes, we've got to make sure that we have the eyes on them so they don't burn out or lose interest in their work, and we move them into that group leader role soon enough, and then the group leader role can lead to some other things down the road. But it's really a matter of where are you going to maximize the return on your investment. Every individual in your company is an investment on your part, and you can only maximize that if, first of all, they're doing what they're naturally good at, and you're rewarding them for that successfully. And two, you've got somebody that's removing the obstacles out of their way to keep them focused on what they're good at. That's a different subject entirely.
Yeah, there's another aspect that I think is coming out in what you're saying, Jason, and that is that it is also a reward to be motivated to continue doing what you're doing. So, for example, you said that form setter, if you're giving them more education and experience with what they're doing, that is a reward in itself on some level. It's not the same as maybe a pay raise or something like that, but it's a reward in itself where somebody can say, hey, I get to become even better at what I'm doing. I get to enjoy it more. I get to fulfill my potential in this area. That's kind of one side of what you're saying. And then there are these pay ranges. How did the pay ranges change as you grew in this in your company?
Well, originally they were very narrow. Say, for example, they were for a form setter, they may have been $2 to $3 or $4 wide, per hour. Now they're $10, $15 wide, because that's what it's going to take. The last thing we want anybody to do is to be motivated to take on a role that they're not suited for because of money. So let's take that off the table. And once you as a company can get that through your head that it's okay to do that, it can really be transformational in how you approach your workforce.
Brilliant. Yeah, I truly believe what we've just been discussing here would revolutionize companies. If people could get it, where somebody actually has to take a decrease if they're going to move up in the hierarchy, because that might not be a good position for them. Now, if it is a good position, great. They can take a bit of a haircut and get into something that they really enjoy that has a different band. But that first band has a little bit of width to it, so that if you're going to make a change upward, you have to kind of think about it a couple of times rather than just going after the money, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to that is there are times, no one likes to be told or likes to think that they're held within a specific role. People do things for a long time and need change. So sometimes you will allow someone who is an initiator or an implementer move into an initiator role. But as a company, you have to sit there and first of all, you got to know this. Second of all, you got to say, all right, we're going to let this person try this. Because sometimes you have to let people find out things for themselves. And we've had multiple examples of this happening within our organization. And once the new wears off, when you start a new job and say, I'm a design engineer, or no, let's stick with the form setter example. I'm a form setter and I've been really good at this and I'm confident in doing it. And all of a sudden I become a group leader. Well, there's a lot of new car smell around me. Everything's new, everything's exciting. I'm proud of my accomplishment. Everybody around me is proud of my accomplishment. And then as time passes, the new wears off and the challenges with performance begin to rear their ugly heads, and I begin to struggle. That person that is not a right fit in the role that they're in knows they're not a right fit before anybody that's around them. And eventually what happens is they're experiencing failure on a daily basis. It may not be external and it may not be major failure, but they know that something intuitively is not right about what they're doing. And they eventually they come to not like, and in some cases hate what they're doing. And they then become motivated for a change. Companies that don't know why this occurs, let those people go. Companies that know why this occurs have allowed the person You kind of know where the end is going to come to. You just don't know when, but you need to have a safety net out there and say, now that you've tried this, would you like to step into this role? And for a form setter, they might become a drafter within our organization because the skill sets are very similar. One is doing it on a bed, the other is doing it on paper. So there is career growth that is there. It's just not always along what people deem to be the classic or traditional lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate this so much. And again, if I could kind of shout this from all the rooftops and have organizations understand it, we'd save people from so much more suffering and trouble in their lives thinking I'm failing at this when I was so good at my former role. What am I doing? What's wrong with me, right? Rather than going, there's nothing wrong with you. We got you in the wrong role. Let's put you back in the right role before it's too late. And now you talked about, again, coming back to this question of you can't directly hire a project manager. You talked about this slightly. You said you don't put somebody into that implementer role for too long before you pull them out into the role that they're best suited for long term. But maybe that's their training ground, or they get some experience down on that level. Maybe talk more about that. Is there an example you can think of where you found somebody, you're like, okay, yeah, you're going to be great in this role, but we're going to put you here for a period of time just so you get your feet wet a bit?
Oh, absolutely. So when our business on the surface may not seem complex, but given the experience that I've had and the interactions I've had with other businesses, our business is one of the more complex businesses out there as far as the number of things that could go wrong and the number of things that have to be done to be successful. We are a manufacturer, first and foremost, that has to do business as a tier one subcontractor. Those two business models don't line up with one another at all. Just simply from an accounting perspective, they don't line up. And we're a batch process job shop when it comes to operational theory. So that is the single most difficult business to run and operate and be successful at. So the point is, it ain't easy, or it's not easy. It's complex. So when we hire someone, we'll start with a project manager right out of school, and they're all gung ho. I've got my degree. I'm ready to be a project manager right now. And we look at them and say, hold on a second. That's the last thing they want to hear, right? But then we say, let's talk about this. Our goal isn't for you to be a project manager right now. Our goal is to help you be a successful project manager in 5 years. And we tell them all this. And what we do is we say the first 5 years, and sometimes it's 3, depending on how fast the person learns, but the first part of your career, we want to teach you our business and give you a tool set that will allow you, when you have a project on your own, it allows you to understand how we do business. You understand how we price our work. You understand how our work comes together. And more importantly, you meet and and you have a relationship with all of the people in those areas that are going to help you be successful and deliver a successful project to our customer. So what we do is a project manager. Now, Dwayne's 5% rule applies here. Really only about 5 to 10% of your project managers or your construction science graduates are change agents naturally. Just like engineers. If we see an engineer that's naturally a change agent, we do everything we can do to hire them. Same thing in the construction science world. So, but they all come out thinking they can be project managers, which presents a little bit of a challenge at times. So we take them and we say, all right, your first order of business is you've got to learn our manufacturing operation. And you're going to go to work in the plant, which means a lot of times coming in the middle of the night to learn to work on a bed, set up a bed, work in quality control, understand the aspects of quality as it relates to our product and how our manufacturing process delivers quality in that regard. And then they're going to spend some time in estimating to learn how we price work and learn how that initial transformation process, when we take a job and the customer says, we'd like you to look at this, all the steps we have to go through to make that happen. They probably don't spend too much time in drafting or engineering. but they spend a little bit of time around that, and they're engaged with those roles through the plant and through estimating because they're needed to support them. That they begin to understand what it takes to get work through those areas, and by the time they complete that process, they've been in two roles that are implementer roles. And we're very mindful of how long they spend in that role before we move them. We've got to have them get to a point they develop a little bit of knowledge and competency around what they're doing, but we've got to pull them out before they reach that burnout phase that we know they'll reach. And usually it's a period about 2.5 to 3 years. And then what we'll do, they won't go into project management, but they'll go into some aspect of it, which is what we call a field superintendent, where they're responsible for managing our erection and our field finishing subcontractors that help us build these buildings in the field. There's in having the plant relationship, that is a very plant oriented, focused job because you got to get the material from the plant to the job site. And if you have quality issues in the field, you've got to communicate those back to the plant so the plant can make changes or fix things before they get to the job site. So once they go through that process and they've demonstrated that they can perform at some competent level, then they're ready to begin to become a project manager. And even then, it's still entry level project manager. They got a lot to learn from there. But if if you're willing to do that and you find people that are willing to do that and you're patient enough, in 2 to 3 years, you build someone with the potential to be successful. And unfortunately, you build someone who's got the ability to be successful, not just in your company, but with other people. And, we always tell ourselves, do not be afraid of doing that. We need to be confident enough in the process that we follow to build these people that we can bring them in, and we need to constantly bring them in and have people in this pipeline knowing that our success is going to be their success, and sometimes it's going to be with someone else and not us.
One thing that's really standing out about what you're saying is the brilliance of allowing people to figure things out on their own. So in this 2-year process, 19 out of 20 people that want to be a project manager probably figure out, wait a second, I love what I'm doing as an implementer. I love this. This fits me. I'm really good at it. This is where I need to stay naturally rather than constantly fighting because they believe they're a project manager. So naturally they see that. But for those 1 out of 20, they go, hold on a sec, this is not fitting me. Let's talk to management. As long as the communication is open there, they will have opportunities to experiment and explore and grow in ways that fit them better in the future. And it's something that really stood out. As you said, if I ever see somebody, like again, these prototypical engineers that are very much on the implementer side, but are actually wired as an initiator, as a change agent, these people, we need to make sure that we find them, that we keep them, that we take care of them in a way that allows them the time needed to grow into that position as will fit them best, right?
So you bring up something interesting. We actually ask anyone that applies to the company for a position to take our surveys. We have the traits profile. We have another survey that we take. So when we interview a candidate, we know what they are. And it's especially with young people just starting out of college. I'll ask them questions in the interview around if they're an engineer. So how do you feel? Where do you feel your career is going to go? Do you see yourself being an engineer in 5 years? They don't know why they're saying this, but they all say no. And they say, no, I think I'd like to get into project management or operations or something like that. They know they're change agents. They've gotten a technical degree, which adds a whole lot of value that is actually not a good fit for them as a person. But there's a whole lot of value in a lot of organizations for that technically educated person that is a change agent. And it's funny, and we don't enter into that development phase without knowing how that person is. So it allows us to, first of all, we're allowing them to self-discover. And we tell them that if you find an area that you really want to work in, you need to tell us. And because we'll do everything we can do to help make that happen. but we also know whether that is a good fit for them over the long run or not, which is what we are interested in. We're interested in the long run because that's how you build experience and institutional knowledge. And we're not interested in experiencing a whole lot of churn in positions that are critically important to us.
All right, lastly, before I let you go, then, we've come full circle. At the beginning of this interview, you said, I knew coming out with that PhD, I knew that I was a change agent. I knew that there was something else going on here. How did you know that about yourself, Jason?
It was a gut feeling. And I didn't know it for certain or know how to explain it until I met with Dwayne the very first time. And he looked at my profile and he said, "This guy's got a PhD in engineering and he is a classic change agent. And I have extremely high behavioral adaptability. The people within the organization call me the chameleon because I could talk to the guy on the floor, I could talk to the president of the United States, and I would see them all the same way. But this isn't about me. I didn't know how to quantify that, but I did have a gut feeling. And people's guts are usually right. And it's just, are you old enough or are you brave enough to understand the value of that gut feeling and intuition? Intuition to me is a very big deal and it's very, very real. And it is something that my generation was trained to ignore. I don't think younger generations were trained to be that way. But if you look at leadership in most business today, they're Gen Xers or baby boomers, and we were trained to ignore that emotional side of things, right? So when your gut tells you something's not right, you know, you tend to try to figure out why. And you're constantly, when you're in a role, you're constantly taking from the role what sort of intrinsic satisfaction are you getting from just waking up and going to work? And if it's not there, you might try to pursue, is it you or is it the job or is it both? Is there a mismatch between the two? And the last thing we ever want to experience is for someone to be miserable in their job. And we want people to be happy when they come to work. Our work is very, very challenging. And the demands, we're under constant deadline pressure. So the work we do is stressful. We don't want people to come to work that don't like what they're doing or that are in the wrong seats on our bus, to use the analogy of good to great. And I'll leave you with this. The performance of our organization has increased over time, especially in the areas where we have been disciplined in applying initiators into initiator roles and implementers into implementer roles. There's a direct correlation to the things that Jim Collins says in that classic book that you can measure, that you can quantify, and that you can use for the betterment of your whole business, whether it's financially or whether it's culturally.
Fantastic. Jason, your time is valuable. Thank you so much for the time you've given me here. Thank you for making the commitment. We will schedule that again right away here, but appreciate the time. There's so much value in what you said. I'm going to take some time and just kind of parse it in my brain so I can make sure I give an intro and outro here that does you justice and what you've just given everyone. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I feel like I say this a lot, but I truly hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. The second interview is a little bit better because I talk a little bit less. But here are some takeaways that I want to leave with you. Number one, thinking like an owner is so valuable. Spending money like it's your own is a lesson that I think the best employees always need to learn. When we can put ourselves into somebody else's shoes, it allows us to be so much more valuable in relationship to that person and vice versa. When an owner or a leader or a developer, as we talked about initiators a lot, if these individuals can put themselves in entry-level roles or other levels of the organization, if we can put ourselves in their shoes, it also makes the organization better for both parties again. Having too many owners would be terrifying in a business. And that's something that Jason talks about when he talks about the percentages. I think he said 10 to 15% are change agent type jobs, which leads me to my second point, and that is change agents are crucial for every business. How do we become better change agents? Should everyone do so? Those are really good questions to ask. We have to be cautious about thinking about that anyone can become a change agent. So here's an important question for your business. What proportion is it for you? How many change agents versus implementers, people who can take these change ideas and implement them better, what is the ratio? One thing that I was thinking a lot about during the interview, I didn't ask about it, but was how many job descriptions mention good communication and how evil this is for business. When is the last time you saw a job description that did not say the person needs to be a good communicator? The reason this is evil for business is that it's pushing away the right people for certain positions, and it's attracting the wrong people for certain positions. Again, when you have an implementer who wants to just like head down, rear end up, work, don't be bothered by anyone, don't bother anyone else, just really focus on their business, and they're perfectionists, and they can just get so much done when they're left alone. Forcing that person to communicate a lot with others would actually take away from their efficiency and the great value that they can bring. One quote that I really enjoyed from this interview was, sometimes you can't directly hire a project manager into a project management role. I'm going to repeat that. Sometimes you can't directly hire a project manager into a project manager role. Understanding the right roles needed for a business is key to finding the right people. This is essential for business success. So one challenge that I'm sitting with right now after the interview, and I've edited it all now, is understand who my form setters are. Who are the form setters in my business? And then again, managers of form setters cannot be found in the pool of form setters. Why? Because they think differently. They're wired differently. Not good or bad. Both have advantages. Another point that really is sitting with me is compensation, and how Metromont has made changes to their compensation structure, finding better reward systems. Rather than losing fantastic form setters by placing them in a role that does not suit them, we can keep people in a role that they will be most satisfied with long term. That this cannot exist because we're going to lose the best of our people if we keep promoting people to failure. If we keep promoting people to a place where they are going to be frustrated and eventually leave and never come back. We cannot afford that as businesses. Jason sees promoting people to an area of lesser competence as devaluing their technical ability, which was a beautiful way of saying, hey, focus on this person's strengths. Do not put them in an area of weakness. The tip is to reward a person based on their entire career rather than simply with upper movement in a company. We need to stop having reward structures that motivate people to take on roles that don't fit them. And what he discussed here, what I've discussed previously on this podcast, is pay bands are the way of the future in business. I really believe this, that pay bands are going to take over in really successful businesses. Now, as time passes, this is what Jason said, the new wears off. Challenges of performance start to kick in. Individuals experiencing failure on a daily basis. This is not good for people. There are other ways to handle frustration from less upward movement in a company or lack of a variety over decades. Again, a form setter becoming a drafter. You can move sideways in a company. You can give some variety without killing somebody's motivation and desire and an intrinsic motivation. Now, before I leave you, and I'm getting ready to edit the second interview with Jason right now, if you have not read Good to Great, I don't know if I've mentioned this before in the podcast, if you have not read Good to Great, read it. One beautiful idea that comes from that book is putting people in the right seats, getting everyone off the bus and putting people back in the right places, and how valuable this is, not just for the business, for the individuals in the business. Everyone becomes more satisfied when they're doing what they are wired to do. Enjoy your week.